Hey everybody, and welcome to the 10th episode of the Level Creation Guide for Half-Life. In the previous episode, we learned how to use new entities and techniques to create the alien environment of Zen. In this episode, we're going to be learning the basics of a new type of entity called environment entities and how to use them to add special effects into our levels. For our test level, I've created two rooms connected by a small hallway. We'll be jumping between these rooms, so for the sake of simplicity, I'll be calling this room the North Room and this room the South Room. I have not placed any light entities in our room, but just a single info player start in the South Room. Let's begin with the first environment entity we're going to be learning this episode, called Environment Sprite. Use the Entity tool and create the Environment Sprite entity in the South Room. The Environment Sprite entity allows us to insert a 2D sprite graphic into our level. Sprites are used throughout Half-Life for adding detail like fire, steam, sparks, light bulb glow, and even for all the alien effects seen within the Resonance Cascade sequence. Needless to say, it can add a lot of eye candy and depth to any area. For this episode, let's keep it simple and use the Environment Sprite entity to create a glow effect for our lights. Looking at the Environment Sprites attribute section, the first setting we should adjust is the Render Mode option. Whenever first creating an Environment Sprite entity, it will display the default sprite graphic without removing the black alpha channel color. The Render Mode option will allow us to remove this black alpha channel color and properly display our sprite. The two render modes that will do this is the Glow and Additive option. These two options are nearly the same, as they both remove the black alpha channel color, but the Glow option has an added effect of intensity depending on how close the player is. Let's use this neat effect by selecting the Glow option. Once selected, our environment sprite will be displaying its sprite properly. The next option we can change is the actual sprite graphic itself by selecting the Sprite Name option. Click on the three dots button to bring up a folder containing all the sprites Half-Life offers. There are many useful sprites in here, but since we're creating a glow effect, let's choose the Glow 03 sprite by either double-clicking or selecting it and pressing the Open button. Once chosen, we are ready to do some further adjustments. The FX amount, color, frame rate, and scale options all have a large impact on the appearance of our sprite. The FX amount option allows us to adjust how transparent our sprite is, with 255 being no transparency and 0 being invisible. Let's enter the value of 255 so we can fully view our sprite in-game. Next is the color option. This allows us to change the color of our sprite to any chosen color. Let's click on the Pick Color option and choose the light yellow color for our sprite. After setting our sprite's color, let's move on to the Frame Rate option. This option is useful for sprites that animate, allowing us to control the speed of each animation. Unfortunately, our glow sprite has no animation, so we won't need to adjust this setting. The last option in the attributes section is the Scale option. This allows us to adjust the size of the sprite, with the value of 1 being its default size. But be careful when editing this value, as even the smallest of values such as 0.1 can result in a plus or minus of 10% change in the actual sprite size. Let's decrease the size of our sprite by 50% by entering the value of 0.5 into this option. Now that our sprite appearance is all set, all we need to do is go to the Flag tab and enable the Start On flag in order for our entity to be activated upon level load. Once selected, exit out of the entity browser. There we go, we successfully configured our environment sprite entity. Now that we have our glow effect, we're going to need a light to place it with. Instead of creating a simple light entity, let's create an actual ceiling light using the block tool and give it the ability to produce light of its own using the info text lights entity. Let's do this by creating a small 16 by 16 unit block with a thickness of 4 units in the south room. Then, texture the sides with this texture and texture the bottom face with this texture. Once textured, let's position our ceiling light to be in the middle of the ceiling. After that, let's position our environment sprite entity to be slightly below our ceiling light block. Now that everything is positioned, let's duplicate our sprite and ceiling light block to the north room by first selecting both, then by holding Shift and drag-clicking a copy to the north room. Once created, position them to be center of the ceiling in this room. There we go, everything is created and positioned properly. Let's now use the Entity tool and create the Info Text Lights entity. The Info Text Lights entity allows us to give most textures the ability to produce light without the need of a light entity, and also gives us control over how bright and what color the texture emits. As a quick disclaimer, although we'll be using this entity as the primary source of light in our level, I do not normally recommend this over using the other light entities. The Info Text Lights entity is best used for textures that should give off light, like computer screens, vending machines, and light textures, but not for producing the main light in your level. With all that said, let's continue with the episode. In this entity's attributes section contains no options for us to adjust, nor any flags to select. In order for us to use this entity, we're going to have to click on the Smart Edit button and add a key and value number. In the key option, enter in the name of the texture you wish to produce light. This can be quite a pain to do, as some texture names are not that user-friendly to enter. An easy way around this is by exiting our Info Text Lights entity browser and by clicking on the Browse Texture button on the right-hand side of Jack. In this texture catalog window, click on the Only Use Textures option to only show textures we have used so far in our level. Since this is the texture on the bottom face of our ceiling light, let's select it by double-clicking on it and the window will close. Now on the right-hand side of Jack, we'll display our texture and its name for us to see. Let's now re-enter our Info Text Lights entity and hit the Add button. Let's type in our texture's name displayed on the right into the key option. Once done, click on the OK button and it will be added into this entity. The next option we need to enter is the value option. This controls the color and brightness of our texture's light and requires an RGB code and brightness value. Unfortunately, this too is a pain to get, but a fast way to do this is by exiting the Info Text Lights entity and by creating a dummy light entity. In our Lights entity browser, our attributes section won't be displayed properly, so we'll first need to click on the Smart Edit button to revert back to the normal attributes section. Once done, click on the Brightness option and click on the Pick Color option. Let's select this yellow color and press OK. Now highlight the number in our Brightness option and copy it by either pressing Ctrl+C or by right-clicking and pressing Copy. Once copied, exit out of the Entity browser. Delete our dummy light entity, and go back into our Info Text Lights entity. Click on the Smart Edit button to see our entered texture. Click on our texture entry, then delete the value text and paste our number by either pressing Ctrl+V or by right-clicking and selecting Paste. Once pasted, the only number set we should change is the brightness value. Due to how the Info Text Light entity works, we'll need to raise the brightness value considerably higher in order to make the texture produce enough light. Let's change the last set number value from 200 to 100,000. Once entered, that should be it. Let's exit out of this entity and press F9 to see how it looks in-game. Awesome work! Our ceiling light is producing light and our sprite is looking great. We are now ready to continue to the next environment entity we're going to be learning this episode, called the Environment Sound entity. Using the Entity tool, let's create the Environment Sound entity within the middle of our north room. The Environment Sound entity allows us to add an audio effect to the sounds produced in our level. Here are a few examples of the different audio effect profiles this entity offers. Using this entity in conjunction with the appropriate landscape can add a whole new level of realism to our environments. Looking at its attributes section, there are only two options available: radius and room type. The radius option controls how large of an area in units the player needs to enter in order for it to apply its audio effect to the sounds. Think of it like a trigger multiple entity, where the player needs to enter in its area in order for the entity to be activated. This option is particularly important though, as you can have multiple environment sound entities, meaning you can switch between different audio effects within the same level. For our room, let's increase the value to 256 for our radius option. Next is the room type option. This option stores all the different audio effects that we can apply to the sounds in our level. Unfortunately, these audio effects can only be heard in-game, so playtesting might be required when choosing the appropriate effect for your area. For this episode, let's choose the Chamber Medium option. This is how it sounds like in-game. Once selected, that should be it. Let's exit out of our Environment Sounds Entity browser. Now that our Environment Sound entity is set, let's create another by copying it to our South room. Like before, simply select our Environment Sound entity, hold Shift, and drag-click Release a Copy into our South room. Once created, let's position this new Environment Sound entity to be in the middle of this room. Then, let's access its entity browser by double-clicking on it. Since this entity is a copy, it will already have 256 entered into its radius option. As for the room type option, let's change it from Chamber Medium to Normal in order to switch our sounds back to default in the South room. Once chosen, let's exit out of our entity browser and press F9 to hear how it sounds in-game. Great job! Our environment sound entities are working and are properly overriding each other. Let's continue to the last environment entity we're going to be learning this episode, called the Environment Shake entity. Let's use the Entity tool to create the Environment Shake entity in the North room. The Environment Shake entity allows us to shake the player's screen for a specified amount of time. This entity is useful for adding impact to environmental explosions, gargantuan footsteps, and even earthquakes in our level. In its attribute section, we have several options that control the characteristics of our screen shake. The first option is the Familiar Name option. Since we're going to have to use a trigger entity in order to activate our Environment Shake entity, let's add the name Quake01 to save us from having to come back to this entity. Now that a name is entered, let's start with the first shake characteristic option, called Amplitude. This option controls the power of the vibration, with 0 being no vibration and 16 being equivalent to dropping the bass. For our test level, let's enter in the value of 12 into the Amplitude option. The next option is the Effect Radius option. Similar to the Environment Sounds Radius option, this applies the shake effect to everyone within the radius. However, we can bypass this option altogether by entering into this entity's flags section and checking off the Global Shake option. Let's check this option and return back to the attribute section. The Duration option allows us to give the shake effect a time limit in seconds. Let's enter in the value of 4 into this option, so our effect lasts for 4 seconds. Now, the last option is called the Jerk Rumble option. Simply put, this changes how intense our vibration is, with 0 being a jerk and 255 being a rumble. Let's set this option with the max value of 255 to give our screen shake a rumble effect. There we go, our Environment Shake entity is all set up. Let's exit out of the Entity browser. Now, in order for us to activate our Environment Shake entity, we're going to need to use a trigger entity. Let's create a block in the middle of our hallway and apply the AAA texture to the entire block. Then, let's transform it into a trigger once entity by pressing Ctrl T. While in its attributes section, add the name Quake01 to its target option and exit out of the entity browser. Before we do a final playtest, there is one last entity we can use to make our shake more convincing. Unfortunately, the environment shake entity does not produce a sound with the shake. So let's create an ambient generic entity to add a sound effect to go with our shake entity. Once created, add the same name Quake01 to its name option so that our trigger once will also trigger this entity. Now that the name is applied, let's go to the Wave Name option. Click on the 3 dots icon to open up the Half-Life sound directory. Go to the Weapons folder and choose the mortarhit.wave file. This is how it sounds like in-game. Once chosen, let's go to our Entity's Flag tab and select the Play Everywhere and Start Silent options. Once selected, that should be it. Let's exit out of our Entity browser and press F9 to do a final playtest for our environment shake and the rest of our environment entities. Congratulations, you successfully learned the basics of environment entities. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll try my best to help. I hope to see you next time in the 11th episode of the Level Creation Guide for Half-Life.